Again, I'm Amy Hedemio. I'm over here at Body Science, a functional medical clinic that's here in Miami. And we made it our mission at the beginning of the year to make sure that we can get some good quality education out there for everybody. There seems to be a lot of misinformation in the world of MTHFR. And even if the information is clear, sometimes what happens is it's not pertinent to you, either because you don't have that specific genetic mutation, or because perhaps you have additional medical conditions on top of MTHFR, or any number of factors. And so what we're trying to do is, from Body Science, just make this more personalized. You get a really clear understanding of exactly how to help support your unique MTHFR needs. And to that, we're going over hormones today. Kyle, you joining me? All right. Let me just move over. Our last couple times, or our last two, we're here in clinic, and then we always have the best intention, which is slide deck, put it together early in the day, and finish it with patients early and jump on this webinar. But last time and this time we ran a little bit late, both on the slides and finishing with patients. So Kyle was just over here. He'll join us in just a minute. And let me go ahead and start the slides. Again, for everybody that's on today, here is our conversation. We have already covered a couple of different videos at the beginning on general information on MTHFR. What is MTHFR? What does it mean? How do you read your lab results? We went over both thyroid and gut dysregulation. So we were just tracking down what is essentially the side effects of having a detoxification mutation, right? So what the bottom line is, MTHFR is when you have a genetic mutation on either one or both genes, it's because you're not as good a detoxifier. Hey, Kyle.
Hey, everybody.
So you just don't make methylation as often as somebody else, meaning you can't clear toxins. And so remember, methyl groups, we're really just talking about carbon and carbon donation and the role of that carbon in functioning as a detoxifier. You're going to make methyl donors in the form of things like SAMe from the mitochondria. And when there's a mitochondrial inefficiency, so that's the MTHFR story, right? Not enough folate reductase. Then there can be difficulties making methylation, making detoxifiers, and making antioxidants. So we know, because we have MTHFR and you guys have MTHFR, we know that we have a tendency to get dirty. And the question is, well, a couple of things. Thing number one, what areas are affected when toxins build up? And thing number two, how do we get clean? So now just taking one more step back, if the beginning for us was what's MTHFR, how do you read your lab results, how do you get kind of a sense of orienting with MTHFR, then step two is what are the common things that can result? And we know glands dysregulate, so we touched on thyroid. We know gut dysregulation can be common because you're tracking unpackaged toxins through the intestines. And then as well, just talking glands, we know reproductive tissues are oftentimes going to dysregulate. So we're talking about ovaries in women, testes in men, and how reproductive hormones affect us. And so I started with our starting slide. Hang on, let's take a look. Okay, it's going to take just a minute, guys. I first bring up the slide deck and then share screen. Hang on. I've lost my mousing navigation power. Okay, let's go for it. Okay, let's see. All right, we just have about 5 slides today. The goal of the slides is just to give us kind of a general direction. We'll talk for about 20 minutes and then we'll open it up to questions. Our goal really is, again, to provide education and make sure that the education is something that you're benefiting from, that you need, that you is actually pertinent. So that's why we'll go through any questions that you have in the end. Okay, that's us. Here we are at Body Science. And let me just move our picture. We are a functional medical clinic that's down here in Miami, Florida. I am Amy Hedemio. I am the scientific director over here.
I'm Kyle Jordan. I'm the nurse manager.
Okay. And so we move right into, we got to put it on slideshow. Hang on. There we go.
Damn.
Okay, that's a little better. We don't have a truck in our last picture.
No.
No. Okay. MTHFR and reproductive hormones, and very specifically, we're talking estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. I had thought to go over the common hormone dysregulations, but I'll tell you what, I actually think we start first with pathways.
Yeah.
Let's go pathways. So we're going to come back to the fact that hormone imbalances, they lead to estrogen dominance, they lead to a condition of low progesterone, and oftentimes in women, something like PCOS. In men, it can be low testosterone. Let's come back and discuss symptoms of these, but let's take a look on the science first.
Yeah.
Thank you, Genova. We took this right out of your sample results. So you can take a look at these pathways. They're readily available, but this one is from Genova. And so let me tell everybody how to read this, just so you kind of get a sense of things. You're looking at a roadmap of hormones, and I know it's a lot of science. So when I say that, it's not because I don't think that as a participant of this webinar, it's hard to understand or that you can't understand it. What I am saying is, guys, let's get to this science, and the reason it's the root of reproductive issues when it comes to MTHFR. And also, let me throw out a clarification. When we're talking about reproductive, I'm just describing reproductive hormones. I'm not talking about the capacity to be reproductive or to get pregnant. Instead, what I'm saying is estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are critical hormones for both men and women. Anybody after they've already gone through puberty. So young women and young men as well. They are important for reproduction, but they have a litany of uses outside. And so I would tell you there are a huge number of receptors for progesterone, as an example, in the brain. And so when progesterone is low, what that looks like is anxiety, oftentimes forgetfulness, sometimes ruminating thoughts, or the thoughts that keep going round and round in your mind. Estrogen makes a personality for sure, right? So that's the weepiness and kind of hot and cold temperament. I had a lady that had come in. This is not too long ago because it was Thanksgiving. I knew she was estrogen dominant, and she said this. She said, I'm not a big crier, but I was watching the commercial on TV for Thanksgiving where there was like the 2 salt and pepper shakers, the man and the woman on the Thanksgiving table. And I saw that they kind of like walked up to each other, kissed, and I found myself crying on the sofa about it. Like, imagine that is commonly like an estrogen dominance, that sense of being overly sensitive and really like internalizing ideas, internalizing emotions. As soon as she said it, I'd already seen her labs. We took a look. So I knew she was estrogen dominant, but just to kind of hear the fact that she was having a hard time controlling mood. So going from really happy to weepy to angry and kind of anywhere in between, and the low progesterone playing out as anxiety. So again, just going back to the fact that reproductive hormones are not about reproduction. That's only one component of what they do. They are so important at regulating so many things. Progesterone and its role in bone health, testosterone and its role in cardiovascular health and muscle integrity, estrogen and its role in vaginal health and cardiac health as well. So these hormones are essential rather, to tissues all around the body. So although they're referred to as reproductive hormones, keeping them balanced is important. And then to that, let me just make one more point, and then we can go through the pathway. It's not a question of how high or how low the levels are. When it comes to reproductive hormones, at least in my opinion, it has to do with the relative ratio, right? So hormones are very importantly stacked in a specific ratio to each other. Estrogen and progesterone, as an example, oppose each other, or they balance each other. Okay, and so let's say that estrogen is high and progesterone is in range. Essentially, by relative ratio, progesterone then is low, right? It's low by comparison to estrogen. PCOS, where estrogen and testosterone are high by comparison to progesterone. So again, part of it is the specific number on the lab, but a bigger component as far as what's going to make symptoms of hormone dysregulation, it really is going to come down to the relative ratio or how those hormones are playing together. And so it looks something like this. For a woman, a pie chart, right? So kind of the pie chart almost divided in half estrogen, half progesterone, with a much smaller sliver that's kind of divided out of there, that's testosterone. For men, the largest part of that pie chart is definitely going to be testosterone, with a small component of it split between estrogen and progesterone. And so, regardless of the number of your dominant hormone, right, the other two hormones, or the other hormone, depending, should in relative ratio make sense. All right, so I don't know.
Okay. When we were talking thyroid, we were talking about still being in range with values, but here we're talking about ratios. Would that
Yeah.
kind of look like that as well, where you can be in range with with your values, but out of ratio?
Okay, so yeah, I like the question. And I feel, guys, I feel a little scattered today. I realized even as I was going through that explanation, it was so long-winded. It's been a long day. Let me try and get a handle on things and make things a little more concise. It's a great question. I didn't make it clear. You know, or not testosterone, but thyroid. So you think about a T4. And so if a lab value for a total T4 on the low side, like a 4.5, the high side at 10.5, you know, the higher you go in a T4, the more energy you're going to have. The
Right.
lower you go. But regardless of your T3 or your T3 uptake or your reverse T3 or other things, T4, independent of the others, is still going to do what T4 does.
Correct.
Okay. In reproductive hormones, by comparison, they don't work as just independent numbers. Instead, they really are a relative ratio. And so even if estrogen is within range, but progesterone is essentially absent, that individual is considered to be
Okay.
estrogen dominant. And they will oftentimes develop symptoms of that dominant hormone, even if the level of that hormone is within an acceptable range.
Okay.
And so it really is kind of a pie chart scenario where each gender has their proper allocation. And now just kind of talking about how do dysregulations happen. So remember, everybody, because we're talking about a world specifically of MTHFR, most commonly what you're going to see is lots of estrogen and then not enough progesterone, and oftentimes not enough testosterone. And the question is, why does that happen in poor detoxifiers, right? Because that's really what we're talking about. Well, remember, it's not just estrogen that's being made in the body. It's exogenous estrogens, and the name for that is environmental estrogens, right? So environmental estrogens are things like pesticides. There's a lot of chemicals, sometimes in things like sunblocks. Foods can contribute. Their other name is xenoestrogens. So xeno and environmental estrogens, they dysregulate things because you have your own endogenous production of the amount that you're making.
Okay.
And then environmentally, you get bombarded with environmental estrogens.
Okay.
So the level of estrogen goes up considerably, but the level of progesterone and testosterone do not go up.
Remains the same.
Right, exactly. Wow. And then let me think about this. There was something else I was just thinking. Oh, the other thing. So when it comes to testosterone, if you're a man, the primary production is in the testes, right? But both men and women are going to have a much lower extent, but estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone coming from the adrenals. Okay. However, there is another place in the body that can exclusively make estrogen, and that's the fat stores. So the heavier an individual is, the higher the likelihood of the estrogen level is going to be. Okay, so the more obese somebody is, the more fat stores somebody has, the more that fat storage, those fat cells are going to make estrogen. And so if you're a man, the testes cannot keep up with that production as far as making testosterone to keep that relative ratio, right? If you're a woman, the ovaries can't keep up with that production as far as progesterone. And so again, there are a handful of sneaky areas where estrogen comes in, and that's why estrogen can commonly become dominant and dysregulate the others. And here's the other thing. Estrogen symptoms, or symptoms of estrogen dominance, mimic what I believe a lot of people think are MTHFR symptoms. So a lot of the times when people think about poor focus, poor concentration, difficulty sleeping with lots of wake-ups, irritability, hot flashes, weight gain, difficulty with weight loss, increased body fat, those things are largely estrogen. And so be careful not to always call everything MTHFR, even if MTHFR was the primary, right? It's the cause of the hormone dysregulation. If the ultimate dysregulation is a result of too much estrogen, then you're going to want to resolve it, not really from an MTHFR point of view, but from an estrogen dominant point of view.
Okay.
You're going to want to look
sense.
to oppose it with things like progesterone, right?
Okay, great.
Yeah. Looking at the pathway over here, and now just kind of thinking about the science of things. So if you look at the left-hand side, you're looking at stress hormone and cortisol. So going from top down, you can see, I'm going to just increase it a little bit. Oh, can I? Oh, we're in the slide deck. Okay, I don't know that we can. All right, so you're looking at pregnenolone at the very top on the left-hand side. It's a map of how hormones are made, and this map goes left to right and then top to bottom. So left is where you're starting off with pregnenolone, and you can see below that 17-hydroxyprogesterone is critical. It's right down here. Okay. And so you can start using up an awful lot of your progesterone in the pathway to make stress hormone. And see what you're seeing down here, cortisol is a stress hormone. And these three unwanted metabolites, here's the takeaway. Here's the non-geek version of the takeaway. The right side of the chart is the reproductive hormones. It's testosterone and estrogen. And the thing is, you can't get there until you've already satisfied the left side of the chart, which is cortisol. And cortisol is the body's natural anti-inflammatory. So if what you have is a lot of inflammation because you're toxic, the toxins have built up, they're causing inflammation, then you're going to keep having this hyperconversion of cortisol into cortisone, right? Back and forth, back and forth. You're going to use up a lot of the ingredients that you would need to make testosterone and then ultimately to make estrogen. And so then you can't make them properly. And so the more stress a body is under, the more toxic a body is, the more anti-inflammatory a body needs, the more dysregulated the reproductive hormones are going to become. Because progesterone is an essential ingredient in the pathway of making cortisol, because testosterone and estrogen can only be made after cortisol has been satisfied, and because this line right over here, going from the green block, which is testosterone, down to the purple block, which is estrogen, is something called the aromatase pathway. And that means when bodies are under high stress, so inflammation or not eating enough or having too much sugar, when bodies are under inflammatory stress, the wrong medications on board, then they will choose to hyperconvert testosterone into estrogen. So going back onto how do you become so estrogen dominant, the more stress and inflammation a body has, the more estrogen is going to make from testosterone.
Okay.
All right. So here's really what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that hormone imbalances when it comes to estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are really important when it comes to personality, when it comes to focus, when it comes to sleep, when it comes to general health. And dysregulations in an individual with MTHFR are fairly common. And the reason is toxic buildup leads to this excessive use of cortisol. What that's going to do is deplete the ingredients that are needed to make the essential reproductive hormones, oftentimes in favor of estrogen, one, because of xeno or environmental estrogens that are just bringing that level up. Number two, because it's going to help testosterone convert into estrogen. And so you wind up in a situation of oftentimes estrogen dominance. And so progesterone and testosterone, they're luteinizing hormones. Here's what they feel like.
Right.
They give the world a sense of well-being and happiness. Okay, so for everybody that's on the call that's already thinking, I don't have that, right? When progesterone and testosterone are low, so especially, again, by relative ratio, so going back to your question about the lab doesn't have to flag low. The question is, by relative ratio, are the luteinizing hormones, progesterone and testosterone, low? So are you estrogen dominant? So luteinizing hormones give the world a sense of happiness. Okay, so when luteinizing hormone is balanced with estrogen, okay, what it feels like the world is good. You wake up in the morning and instead of going, oh, I wonder what today is going to be like, it feels like, I wonder what today is going to be like. It feels like a world of possibilities. Okay, in a situation of low luteinizing hormone, so excessive estrogen by comparison, right, to progesterone and testosterone, things oftentimes feel overwhelming. Even if you don't have a lot going on in your schedule, what happens is I don't know, I could be leaving work without really anything else to do. And then my husband can give me a call and say, could you stop at the store and pick us something? I'd be like, really? Are you kidding? Okay, fine, I could do it, but okay, it feels like that. It feels like overwhelming, even when the thing that you're dealing with is not especially overwhelming. And for a lot of people who have MTHFR and over time have developed estrogen dominance, through any number of things, women after pregnancies, men and women with increased weight, men, especially under high stress work conditions where there's a lot of cortisol and it's called cortisol steal, where testosterone decreases and estrogen increases. So if you think about your personality and you remember it being different than it is now, feeling more high strung, feeling more like almost panicked sometimes and meltdown sometimes, and you're still maybe smart, you're still maybe clear, but not quite as sharp and clear as you used to be. Consider that what's happening over time is as the cortisol utilization is increasing, the dysregulation of estrogen is as well. The level of luteinizing hormones, or the sense of well-being, the sense of general happiness, the sense of contentment, the sense of libido and interest in libido, the sense of being able to sleep easily without a bunch of things waking you up all night long, right? Those things will start to show up as stress continues to play a role. And sometimes it's emotional stress, but again, sometimes it's stress coming from toxins.
And I asked about the thyroid, the ratio question, because that's actually what happened with me. I had a few values that were still in range, but that still needed treatment. And I feel the difference. I feel the difference big time.
Yeah, when hormones are dysregulating, so again, one hormone gets the upper hand, then a personality and a body takes on the appearance and the general tone of that single hormone. It doesn't have proper balance. It doesn't have proper opposition. And so one of the reasons for me it was important to do this specific conversation, this education on reproductive hormones, I think we see a lot of folks that have MTHFR, and they're attributing a lot of estrogen dominant symptoms to MTHFR. And they're trying to just methylate out. And I like the idea of methylating. So estrogen requires methylation.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I should have started with that. Okay, let me back up. Estrogen requires methylation. So that is not true for progesterone. That is not true for testosterone. So as far as the elimination pathway or the metabolism pathway of estrogen, methylation is critical to it. So in poor methylators, commonly estrogen will build up. So then again, you kind of look at that the whole combination of a poor methylator typically having excess estrogen because they can't remove it phase to the liver, right? So estrogen gets stuck. You combine with that all the xenoestrogens, right? All the pesticides that people are coming in contact with, other chemicals and things like soy that build estrogen even higher. And then you think about the fact that estrogen makes weight gains, and then you start gaining weight. And then to compound things, that weight starts making more estrogen. And that's how, if you're on the other side of this call and you're feeling like it sounds like a snowball, it is. And so you may actually be kind of shaking your head and realizing as well, the symptoms that we're talking about have been feeling like a snowball, like they're just getting bigger and bigger over time and becoming more and more dysregulated over time. So things that were happening maybe in the past 5-10 years ago, they were noticeable, but now each year they're getting worse and worse. Same general symptoms, irritability and anxiety and wake-ups at nighttime and maybe some hot flashes. Estrogen can make headaches and migraines. So it's not uncommon to have had those kinds of symptoms, just not as frequently, and then over time they just become more and more frequent.
And not to get off topic, but just talking about optimizing our systems and being aware that other factors can be contributing to that. Gut health as well, I believe beta glucuronidation can reactivate estrogen, right?
Yeah, for sure, right? So beta glucuronidase is an enzyme in the intestines.
Right.
And it's an enzyme that becomes elevated in inflammation. Okay, so it wouldn't be unusual for anybody with inflammation to have a higher beta glucuronidase level. So then you might be scratching your head and saying, why do we care? Like, why are we all of a sudden talking about an enzyme in the intestines if we're discussing reproductive hormones?
Right.
But the thing is, here's the example I would give you of beta glucuronidase. It'd be like this. It'd be like if you decided that you have like an old chair in your house, like an old ugly chair in your house that you don't want anymore. So then you and I, let's say if we were living together, you take the old chair and then you know the garbage is going to come by the end of the day. So you drag it out to the corner, where garbage pickup is, and you leave it out there and then you go to work. And then I go out there and I realize that's my favorite chair. I love that chair. What if I do stuff to it? What if I recover it? What if I whatever? What if I need the chair again in the future? My mom is coming over the weekend. What if I don't have enough chairs? Whatever my thing is. Either way, I just drag the chair back into the house and start repurposing it. Okay, beta-glucuronidase, it's the fact that intestines are very intelligent. Okay, so intestines are not just a hollow tube that things are passing through. Intestines, the gut being the second brain, and there's a lot of truth to that. The enzyme beta-glucuronidase, it can reassemble hormones. And so that's to say, when a hormone has already been used, the body decides, look, we made estrogen, we don't need any more estrogen, let's disassemble it. It will take estrogen and tear it apart. So the liver is going to remove,
deactivate.
Totally. And it's going to dump the pieces of that into the intestines. And it's on its way out, except turns out the intestines get the last decision on this whole thing. So the intestines take a look and they're like, I like that old chair. Wait, I want it back in the living room, right? So they can actually take the pieces of hormone and reassemble them and throw them back into the bloodstream. Imagine like how smart the intestines are. And so the thing is, with people that have gut inflammation, routinely they'll have elevated levels of beta-glucuronidase. Just know that's a measure that you can test in stool. And then for anybody that has elevated beta-glucuronidase, for hormones that have already been thrown into the trash are in the intestines, they can be reassembled. It happens commonly with estrogen. And so you keep getting this recycled estrogen that gets thrown back into the bloodstream again. So it's true. There's really a very, very close link between estrogen increases, so again, estrogen dominance in folks that have MTHFR, because you can't methylate it out.
Right.
And the inflammation that's already in that individual, that's going to increase things like the enzymes in the intestines that are now going to recirculate estrogen even more. And that estrogen is going to trigger fat stores. And then those fat stores are going to make even more estrogen. So I can imagine if you're on the other side, you're like, what do I do? What do I actually do with all this estrogen? So two things. Let's go over the 3 conditions.
Yeah.
And then let's come up with a plan, guys, because here's the thing. Here's what you should know for sure today. These conditions that we're describing are very, very treatable, right? MTHFR is a treatable condition, and the hormone dysregulations that result from an individual that has MTHFR mutations who has built up a significant toxic burden, and then the resulting hormone dysregulations, those resulting hormone dysregulations are very, very correctable. And so that really is our message.
They really are.
Yeah, I know we spend a lot of time on the science over here, but really the takeaway of what you're seeing on your screen is on this roadmap, you have to start from left to right, and left is stress. So until you've satisfied the stress hormone or cortisol, nothing else is going to take precedence in the body. And the hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, are all about building. And cortisol, by comparison, is all about wearing out and tearing down. So you don't want to keep bodies in a high stress situation, and you don't want to keep toxins circulating. You want to bind them and remove them. For me, I like the idea of a detox, and you want to maintain proper detoxification with the use of methyl donors if you're a poor methylator, so that the burden for the stress hormone is not so extreme that it basically cuts into the products, the ingredients that are required in order to make the reproductive hormones. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so we go up here. Let's just take a quick look at these 3. Let's talk about things that can be done, and then we'll go over to questions. So remember, again, the takeaway so far, and just because you have MTHFR does not mean you have to have hormone dysregulations. Most of the symptoms that you're dealing with are not likely MTHFR. That gene has been with you since you were born. And there's lots of people that have MTHFR and do not go on to have difficulty. Instead, difficulties typically arise when folks with MTHFR or poor methylators, right, build up toxins. They can't methylate it. Those unmethylated toxins drive a cortisol pathway and then start causing hormone dysregulations because the hormones can't be made properly, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. A lot of people will ask, should I treat the adrenal axis? And the answer is, I don't dislike it as an option. It doesn't change the fact if you have MTHFR and you're toxic, then likely you do have a degree of adrenal fatigue. Fixing the adrenal fatigue does not fix these hormone disruptions. So oftentimes a better option is fix the hormone disruption, since that's what's triggering even more adrenal fatigue. If you've got gut problems, you got to fix that. If you've got thyroid dysregulation, you got to fix that, in which case cortisol will start to regulate on its own, right? So for a lot of people, they'll take a lot of adaptogens to try and control cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
Cortisol is acting as you'd expect, right? It's elevated because you're using so much, or it's low at this point, like a stage 4 adrenal fatigue because you've used it all up. Either way, taking a pill that's going to address cortisol in and into itself is not going to fix the problem, because that problem is no longer really the issue. The bigger issue now is the resulting hormone dysregulations.
Amazing. Okay.
Okay, so we talked estrogen dominance. Again, the symptoms of estrogen: weepiness, being really sentimental, internalizing your feelings, and just feeling like everything is kind of like meant for you, like to tear your heart out. It can be poor sleep. It can be the sense of just always feeling like you want to melt down. Weight gain, hot flashes. Those are the ones that come to mind. Water retention. And so sometimes achy joints, cravings for salts and sweets. Those kinds of things typically fit into the world of estrogen. Estrogen dominance can happen with or without low progesterone. For some individuals, they just have low progesterone, so it leads to a dominant estrogen. But again, just because progesterone level is really low. Low testosterone as well. I should have put that over here, both in men and women. And then polycystic ovarian syndrome. So PCOS, is a condition where there's a lot of estrogen and it makes cysts, and then those cysts make even more estrogen. And testosterone increases as well. So, clinically you diagnose because it's a high level of estrogen, a high level of testosterone, which is going to lead to a low progesterone. And so whether we're talking about somebody with MTHFR that either has estrogen dominance because a woman that's gone through menopause, so ovaries are not making progesterone any longer, but estrogen is still coming in from xenoestrogens, coming in from fat stores, coming in from conversion of testosterone, right? Coming in from beta glucuronidase. So a woman that can't make any more progesterone, but still has lots of estrogen, or whether we're talking about somebody after a pregnancy, women after pregnancy, where they just have a lot of estrogen, and sometimes the estrogen switches and shut off, but progesterone isn't really sufficient any longer. Whether we're talking about women that have PCOS, so that extra estrogen contribution coming from cysts in the ovaries, whether we're talking about men, and that's commonly referred to as cortisol steal or testosterone that's being forced down the aromatization pathway into estrogen. So here's the thing. I know it's a lot. I know it's a big conversation today, but the takeaway doesn't change. The takeaway is it can be tough sometimes to see it on the lab. It's easy with a woman that's in menopause because you'll see excessive estrogen levels and almost no progesterone. But it can be tough in a woman that's cycling or a man because estrogen looks like it's kind of reasonable, and testosterone doesn't really have a perfect number, meaning men, even with a reasonable testosterone, 400, 500, can still suffer with low testosterone. That's your point about thyroid. What's your perfect number? What are you optimized at? And so in the pie chart concept, even though you might have a testosterone of 400, 500, if that man on estrogen total is looking at a level of like 120, 140, 150, then he still may actually be estrogen dominant in spite of having a reasonable testosterone. Yeah. And then, I don't know, I think our last slide, then we can go to questions. Our last slide is just looking at methylation when it comes to estrogen. So green is good, yellow is not great, and red is the kind of estrogen that causes cancer. And so the question is, why do we care about estrogen and estrogen dominance? And the answer is, you want to methylate out estrogen. So the two estrogens that are on the right side, that ME stands for methylated. So when you methylate estrogen, you deactivate the cancer-forming version of it, and then you can properly remove it from the body. When you look at the two on the bottom, what you're seeing on the 16-alpha or the 4-hydroxy, you're looking at variants of estrogen that have not been properly methylated. This pie chart is the pie chart of an average individual. For a lot of people with MTHFR, that red section, the 4-hydroxy version of estrogen, is very large. Sometimes we'll see it and it will take up like half of the pie chart. And for those folks, because estrogen can become cancer causing when it's not properly methylated or deactivated or made safe, those are the folks that are kind of at the top of our list to make sure that we're treating and opposing estrogen for. Okay. And then what else do we have? What else am I missing? Again, I know it's a giant science conversation. I know we have to circle back and go over treatments, but the reason I thought today would be useful just to go over the science is to kind of give everybody a foundation in what's going on. What's the link between estrogen and reproductive hormone imbalances?
Right.
What is estrogen dominance? And my hope is that everybody that's here takes a look and researches estrogen dominance. I think what you'd find, a lot of the symptoms that you're attributing to MTHFR are in fact estrogen dominance. I think a lot of folks that are on this call will take a look and realize, well, MTHFR is kind of it's the predisposing issue, but the estrogen dominance is what's currently causing all the symptoms. And so then treating that estrogen dominance becomes a top priority. Yeah, I like, for me, I'll normally, again, detox out estrogen, and then I'll continue to methylate it out. If beta glucuronidase is elevated, I'll use calcium D-glucarate. These things are all in the MTHFR store, just so that you guys know, so you can go over there if you'd wanted to, but just to kind of throw some names out there of things that I normally use. And I like the use of progesterone in individuals that are very estrogen dominant. So check with your clinicians and see what they think about that as well.
Yeah, I've been using the detox shake in the morning.
Yeah.
And I try to stay away from artificial and processed foods, and we've seen my estrogen levels come down significantly, substantially, even in the presence of an okay testosterone, and we've done better with that as well. The estrogen, I'm really happy with the number that we've come up.
Do you notice any change in your personality now that your estrogen to testosterone ratio?
Yes. Well, just in general, I think since I've done the detox, I'm really staying away from artificial and processed foods. I'm including a lot more green, whole foods in my diet. I explained it to somebody the other day. I said, "This is the way it feels. I'm a pretty hard worker, and I school and extracurricular and work out." And I'm waiting for that burnout moment, like that moment where I say, man, today was just rough. And it feels like it's going to get there on a rough day, and it just doesn't. And I still feel good. I think that's still the mindset, probably the hormone mindset on that side that says, you know what, today wasn't that rough of a day, actually. You did everything that you normally do, and you still have more to do. And I can wake up a lot earlier. And you know about that. I can wake up, I usually wake up around 4:30, and I start my regimen, my day around there. And it's just a continuous flow of good energy and good thoughts to just really good mindset of saying, I'm actually not that tired, and
it's funny how sometimes I'll describe to somebody when I'm seeing them here, like the idea of being overwhelmed. If you have never dealt with estrogen dominance, I'm not sure that you can relate to that term in quite the same way. But for anybody that has MTHFR, likely at one point in your life or another, you have been in a position where you're estrogen dominant, and you know what being overwhelmed feels like. It's not because there's so much going on. It's just because it's like you can't get your bearings. You're not thinking as clearly or focused nearly as much. And again, things just feel almost ominous. Like there's nothing really bad going on. And I'll hear this a lot. I'll hear people describe for me. They'll say, I have everything to be happy about. I don't know why I don't feel happy. And we have a lot of people that have come on over here, and they'll tell me that they've Googled at one point or another bipolar disorder, right? Because they go from being really happy to really anxious, back and forth, and they just can't get that mood control. And so, when estrogen dominance is, going on, the way I described it before, when you wake up in the morning, what you want is to wake up and go, wow, I wonder what today's going to be, right? You don't know, but it's a day of who knows what kind of possibility. But when estrogen is dominant by comparison to progesterone, or in men by comparison to testosterone, you wake up and it really feels like, I wonder about today. I hope it's going to be a good day. And you want it to be a good day, but the mindset always kind of feels again like a little bit of a dark cloud following you around. It's funny, right?
And
it's funny.
You said it exactly. You want it to be. So
yeah.
I thought I felt good. I thought that just because I still went through the day and I did what I have to do, I said, all right, well, I'm managing it well. But I still felt overwhelmed. I still felt I thought those thoughts, I felt those feelings, and I thought that just kind of being able to disregard them made me, that stronger person. In actuality, it wasn't actually. It was still taking a toll, and we saw that in my adrenal fatigue.
Yeah.
And so, it definitely made a difference for sure.
The other thing is when a lot of times when you have that hormone imbalance because you think about who you used to be. You could manage so many more things. Like you think about a period of time where work was likely harder and you had other things going on and a family life that was really busy, whether it was kids or anything else, and you seem to manage. And now you look at yourself and you have a handful of things and you just feel overwhelmed, right? So if you've noticed that change in your personality, then consider the fact that what happened initially was adrenal fatigue, right? What happened initially was this demand for cortisol. If your MTHFR, one, because you built up toxins, right? And then second, aside from MTHFR, just the burnout, right? The burnout of most people's lives. So you put that kind of combination together and you start becoming estrogen dominant, right? Again, you start converting testosterone into estrogen. You start using up progesterone in order to make cortisol. And so again, estrogen starts taking a bigger and bigger piece of that pie. And then you realize that even if you're still sharp, as I know I said this before, but it really is true.
Exactly.
Even if you're still sharp, even if you're still getting through your day, it's not as easy as it used to be. And you can't juggle as many things as adeptly as you used to. You're still you, but you just can't seem to organize in quite the same way. So what we hear a lot here in the clinic is people that are convinced that it's happening because they're getting older. That's a fallacy. So anybody on the other side of this webinar that's thinking that all of a sudden you're aging into forgetfulness or you're aging into sleep where you have more wake-ups or you're aging into ruminating thoughts and anxiety, that's not true. That's not how aging works at all. That's how hormone dysregulations work if they're not corrected. Because what happens is they just continue unless, again, you take kind of a step back, you correct them, and as well correct the adrenal, side of things, reducing toxins, reducing sometimes workload, finding more balance, whether it's meditation or anything else. But if you have a body and it's under huge amounts of stress, inflammatory stress, emotional stress, lifestyle stress, I'll have people that come on over here and they want to get better, but they're not willing to make any changes in their lifestyle to accommodate for that. And what I would tell you is it doesn't work, right? Because unless you can balance out the adrenal demand, the stress demand, the demand for cortisol, as long as cortisol demand is high, estrogen dominance is going to be kind of a foregone conclusion. And so it's not as simple as just taking a pill to try and regulate cortisol. Ashwagandha is not like a magic trick. Instead, you pair up an adaptogen, licorice root, ashwagandha, whatever combination you're using with vitamin C, but you pair it up with a lifestyle change, right? And so whether it's taking breaks throughout the day, whether it's eating and making sure that you're eating every 2.5 hours. I know for
that
you,
was a big one for me.
I think the way that you landed in adrenal fatigue was probably eating.
Fasting, intermittent, too much intermittent fasting, and just not controlling my stress responses. And then so as soon as I started really diving into deep breathing, just taking moments of gratitude, I noticed I was eating more, right? So I wasn't fasting any longer. I was eating more. My physicality was increasing and my fat was decreasing at the same time. So, and that wasn't happening with the fasting.
We were talking about it this morning. So I know for lots of folks, they are big into intermittent fasting. I would tell you, there are a number of situations for me where I like intermittent fasting and I'll make a suggestion to intermittent fast. But here is the question. When you intermittently fast, so let's say that you go to bed at, 10 o'clock, and then you wake up in the morning at, let's say 8 o'clock.
Well, early.
Okay, let's say 6 o'clock.
At 5, yeah.
Okay, let's say 5 o'clock. Okay, so what is that? That's 5, that's 7, so that's 7 hours of fasting. Okay, and then you intermittent fast, let's say until the afternoon. So now you add on to that another 7 hours. Now you've got 14 hours of not eating. And so the question is, what do you think your body is doing? And the answer is, your body is not actually fasting. That's not what's happening, right? Because in order for the cells to work, they need energy. And in order for them to get energy, you're going to have to start slicing and dicing areas of the body. And so some of the tastiest is going to be muscle, right? So you're going to use cortisol and you're going to start breaking muscle down into amino acids so you can feed the cells, right? You're going to start breaking down the glycogen blocks in the liver into glucose. You're going to start tearing things down. So you need a way to tear things down. Cortisol, by definition, is that material. And so what's going to happen is you're going to elevate cortisol in order to mine nutrients from inside the body. And so again, there is very definitely an application for intermittent fasting.
Right, yeah.
I certainly am a proponent in some very specific cases, but if you are somebody that has adrenal fatigue or you've got a number of hormone disruptions, intermittent fasting is likely your enemy. It's like your arch enemy. And yeah, I remember we were talking about that, and then you changed and you started eating regularly.
Right away.
Because the thing is, if you start eating every 2 to 3 hours, now cortisol doesn't have to come out and cause problems because there's enough ingredients in the bloodstream to feed the cells.
Yeah.
Versus cortisol trying to tear things down in order to make those
Correct.
micro units of nutrients.
And it's not making an impact on my calories either. I'm giving just enough to let my body know, hey, there's food on the way, there's supplies on the way.
Yeah.
Don't go into stress response mode. Don't start unleashing cortisol. We're good.
Yeah.
There's food.
Yeah. All right. And so then are we at the question part?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think
Again,
so.
guys, I would tell you this is kind of an unusual call. It was just super sciencey. It wasn't my intention. So I don't dislike science, but I know there was a part where I just kind of rambled on. But we will follow this up as well with some suggestions on exactly how to treat. Okay. Questions. Let's open things up. All right. So the first question is on estrogen dominance. Okay. The question is headaches and migraines. Could that be estrogen? And the answer is yep. So, you don't rule everything else out. You always want to take a look and make sure there are no any other causes. But migraines and headaches are a common consequence of too much estrogen, especially if you're finding it in concert with some of the other symptoms that we discussed. Then you actually may find that they're estrogen. It is not uncommon for people to have migraines as a result of estrogen dominance to treat estrogen and have their migraine subside substantially. So yeah, I would check in with your GP, or if it's a neurologist that's managing that for you, and I would look to tackle your estrogen and see if you can reduce either the frequency or the duration of migraines. That's typically what you're going to see.
See.
All right, so speak more about the ruminating thoughts with progesterone. Oh, it's somebody that can relate to the manic depression comment. Yeah, so here's the thing. First of all, the condition of manic depression certainly exists. So we're not describing that. Instead, what we're talking about is, could having very high estrogen and not enough progesterone, could it make for really high highs and really low lows? And again, feeling in general like things are kind of ominous. Yeah, it very, very definitely can. MTHFR, remember, is genetic. And so chances are you're not the only one in your family that has it. I would check with your mom. I would check with your dad. If they have similar kinds of symptoms, what you're mostly likely looking at is a methylation deficiency leading to those symptoms. And that's why you have the shared symptoms. If you see those similar kind of personalities, like just that melting down, almost tantrum personality between both a mother and her daughter, and especially if they both happen, close to your menstrual cycle, because estrogen is going to be at its highest at that point, then yeah, you want to consider that what you're really looking at is unmethylated estrogen, right?
Yeah.
Again, for me, I like the P5.0 detox. It's not that that's my answer for everything, but because over the last couple of webinars, we're talking about toxic burdens, and in this case, estrogen falls in that category. It's a cholesterol molecule. It has a tendency to get kind of stuck in the body, and as well need to be methylated out. So for that reason, it can build up in a way that you don't want, and so it becomes a toxin like anything else, even though you're making it, even though it's a hormone. And so for me, I'll normally reach first for the P5.0, and then afterwards I'll go with methylation. So pure methylation is my preference as far as something. And then to your point earlier, if there's any gut stuff going on, I like calcium D-gluc. It's called calcium D-glucarate is the bottle that's on the MTHFR store. All right.
We have a question here, Amy, but I'm going to rephrase it to make it sound like it's coming from me. You ready?
Okay.
I've tried everything.
Yeah.
I feel like I was more focused. I feel like I was stronger maybe a few years ago when I was younger. I think I can get back to that. I'm trying everything on my own. Can you help me?
Yeah, so remember, these secondary consequences of being a poor methylator or poor detoxifier, they're incredibly treatable. And so for a lot of people, when they come on in, the way that they look at it is they've been dealing with these symptoms for so long.
Yeah.
And the thinking would be then because they haven't been treated, that must mean that they're not treatable. But that's not true at all. The fact that you haven't gotten the treatment that you need, the fact that you haven't reversed the symptoms, in no way speaks to the reversibility of the symptoms. And so the long and short is the consequences of unregulated MTHFR, so toxic buildup in MTHFR, the consequences, which is going to be kind of a domino effect, right,
Yep.
of falling hormones and gut function and brain health. That stuff really is very correctable. So the goal is to figure out which is the primary or which one happened first. Typically for me, I like to address that one first. I like to have some plan for adrenals, but that again is not the be all end all. And then I'll
Okay.
work my way through hormone groups. And so for some people, it's blood sugar dysregulation. So they're pre-diabetic or they're moving towards diabetes. For some people, it's thyroid dysregulation. For some people, it's estrogen dominance or low testosterone or low progesterone. Regardless of which areas are affected, and over time, commonly multiple areas become affected. So I know it can feel like a maze. And sometimes I know it can feel
Yeah.
incredibly overwhelming. Yeah, I get it. Listen, we're here for you, meaning use this education as your way of becoming empowered. Know that there really are solutions and treatment options out there. Know that MTHFR is a very, very treatable and reversible
It is.
condition, right? And so now it's really just a question of picking your first step. So from a first step point of view, if you have somebody on your team already, functional practitioner or your GP or your nutritionist or somebody that you work with that you like that can help you out with this whole thing, start over there. Again, don't start with just the whole barrage of symptoms. Instead, try and get a sense of what was the initial symptom. Was it weight gain? Was it hot flashes? Was it migraines? Was it poor focus? What exactly was it? Because that will kind of help give you an idea of what the initial hormone dysregulation or systemic inflammation was, where it was located. And I would treat that first. And then oftentimes the other symptoms will resolve because they are happening secondary to that initial thing, right? Your point was a great one. You first have all this gut overgrowth, right, of both healthy and unhealthy microbiota, and then you get glucuronidase elevating, and then the consequence is estrogen. So in that case, you wouldn't really fix the estrogen dominance first, you'd fix the gut problem first. Because if you can reduce inflammation in the gut, then that level of beta glucuronidase is going to reduce, right? Because there's not much inflammation, in which case you're not going to be recycling as much estrogen. So see if you can do a timeline. I find for us here, the most important really is getting a very, very clear history.
Good, yep.
And included in that history is as much history about your family, as much history about what you did when you did it. For a lot of times we'll actually find somebody will describe that they were doing well for a while, and there was a period that they remember they kind of spun out, and then we'll find out. Let's think about this. Okay, I've got a handful of them, right? I've got the lady that started noticing MTHFR. So the time that you start testing and wondering what's going on. She spray painted her dorm room. Teresa, if you're out there, I'm sure you're hearing this story. So yeah, she actually spray painted and slept in a room where she had spray painted and then breathed in all those volatile toxins, and MTHFR became a problem.
Wow.
I have a number of folks that really developed a lot of MTHFR symptoms after extended use of antibiotics. I have two women that are in this group. I don't know if you guys are on right now. They've had back-to-back urinary tract infections. So estrogen is critical for vaginal health. If you're a woman postmenopausally and you don't have enough estrogen, so kind of the opposite that we were talking about, not estrogen dominance, but a lack of estrogen, vaginal atrophy is common. And in a world of vaginal atrophy, urinary tract infections become, more pervasive. And so back-to-back antibiotics can cause like that spin-off of MTHFR. Let me think. I've got so many like weird things of people that something happened all of a sudden. I have lots of women after pregnancy. they just can't get their hormones to re-regulate.
That's another one.
I have a lot of guys that have been under just huge amounts of work-related stress, just unbelievable. I have a couple of men that I see routinely, and they are financial advisors, and I think that's a tough gig for sure. And just watching a market around the clock. So markets around the world, you're basically never sleeping, and you're under that really, really high pressure. So the cortisol steal, and then just making testosterone into estrogen. I had a man who was driving a car that had a gasoline leak. I didn't know it. I actually had to look up the car and then found out that it was a recall on it. And he was breathing in, like gasoline all the time. And it really kicked off his symptoms. And so the interesting thing was, symptoms started shortly after he got that car. For the woman that painted her dorm room, was going to the same thing. Symptoms started shortly after she painted the dorm room. So you'll see. That's why I really did have this woman recently that had a couple of UTIs, took a group of antibiotics back to back to back, and then noticed that she was feeling lousy. But again, in talking to her, we were able to orient that was the time. So we know we're trying to essentially detoxify and methylate out is whatever the leftover chunk was from that use of antibiotics. So if you can locate the area where things started, because we realized from that on her side with the antibiotics, the dysregulation was in thyroid because of the antibiotic, and then we were able to correct the thyroid. So, all right.
Alrighty.
All right, guys. Listen, thanks so much for joining today. It was great having you. I'll try in the future. I think I need like a little quiet time first. Just because coming in from the office and then rushing out of like an appointment, a patient appointment, and then trying to get to this, I know it made today for crazy. So next time, maybe I'll do a little meditating. And then that way I'll be ready for it. Our next time I had planned on fertility, but I think instead we have Dr. Farrow and he'll join us. He is OB-GYN. So when it comes to MTHFR, dysregulations, and fertility, but I think we'll probably add one more in. We've got a handful of people that had questions about some of the prior classes that we've done.
Correct.
And so I think what we might actually do is try and answer some of those questions first. Before we go farther down the road of MTHFR.
I like it.
Yeah.
All right. And if there's anything you see, so we will modify our schedule. We will modify anything we have to really meet your needs. And so the reason we're doing the next webinar, a culmination of the questions we received is just because of that, because of the questions that you forwarded to us. So we love to hear your input. We want to know what you want to know.
Yeah, but I like the same, right?
Yeah,
And that's
sure.
great. I'm glad that you said it. It really is true. We're doing this for everybody that's out there and that has questions. We really want to get your questions answered. And so anything that we can do to kind of help you out, we will do it for you. All right. All right, guys. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.